Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Enlighted, to the third and last day of this second edition. I know good things come to an end, bad things as well, so carpe diem. As I was saying, the second edition of this 2019. My name is Elena, and I am thrilled to be back on this stage to be your MC this morning. And what a morning we have prepared for you. We have a fantastic program made up of 2 keynotes and 2 panels. After that, I invite you all to join us at the arena stage for the closing ceremony of South Summit. And when I was rehearsing for our next and our first keynote speaker, I realized it's amazing that in the 21st century, children around the world get bored and confused in classrooms, whilst the tools to engage them and to improve their learning already exist. In this sense, our speaker has said that the biggest risk to schooling is not that it's inefficient, costing a lot of money, but the biggest risk is that it's becoming obsolete. And we need to reframe what young people need to learn in order for them to be prepared for their future, not for our past. Well, he's been schooling himself over decades on education because he's the Director of Education and Skills of the OECD, and he's also the mastermind behind the PISA report, which, as you know, compares schools around the world. He is arguably the person that knows more about the global education landscape in the world. And he has written a book, a fascinating one, with all the lessons he's learned over the years. This book is entitled World-Class: How to Create the 21st Century School System. And the good news is that Fundación Santillana is giving the book for free. This book, you cannot buy it. It's for free. After his talk, you can join us at the exit. Well, he will be signing the book, and you can take a copy home. So you have no excuse now to find out all the keys to the school of the 21st century. Please join me in welcoming Andreas Schleicher. Welcome.
Thanks, Elena.
Andreas.
Thank you. Buenos dias and good morning. Most of us know how to build a world-class school. Actually, right here in Madrid, you find many world-class schools. But what has been so difficult is to build a world-class education system that ensures that every student benefits from excellent learning. No? You know, I started my career in medical research, and the first thing we do is, look at the patient. We try to think about, what can we do for these patients? What's the right medicine? In school, we still give everybody the same medicine. And then some people become healthy, develop very well, and many fall behind. It's so hard to build a world-class school system, and the gap between what our societies are looking for and what schooling produces is not becoming smaller, it's becoming wider. We track the quality of learning very carefully at the OECD, including through our PISA comparisons. And we started this in the field of science in the year 2006. That's a long time ago for many of us. It was the year before the iPhone was invented. Twitter was still a sound, the Amazon still a river. Many things we take for granted didn't exist, but when you look at schooling in the most advanced nations, we've seen not much change in the way we educate our children. And the world didn't stop in 2009. Remember, that was the year when maps became dynamic, Google Maps driving us, cars became electric, starting to drive without a driver. But again, we haven't seen that translating into better learning outcomes. And if you just think about the time between 2012 and 2015, robotics, cloud computing, virtual reality, biogenetics, big data, huge changes in the world around us, and actually education starting to go backwards. We teach our children more things, but their depth of understanding seems to be declining. No? And if you look at this at Spain, it's very much the same story. No? Very much stagnancy. The gap between what the world expects and what we do is actually becoming wider. No? There are very few education systems that have bucked that trend. You can see, for example, Portugal has been able to keep moving forward. And you can look to Asia, Singapore, moving from good to great, or some regions in China I can no longer put on the map. So yes, some systems have succeeded, but it's been hard. And the first thing we think about, just put more money into the system, but actually that works up to a point. For poor countries, you can see there is a relationship. More money is very, very important to achieve better outcomes. But for most countries, it matters a lot more how we invest our resources than just putting more money into the system. The same is true with time. There's a huge difference in the amount of time that students spend in school. In blue, you can see the time, the learning hours in school per week. In yellow, the learning time at home or private tutoring, whatever. And you can see a country like the United Arab Emirates. Students spend close to 60 hours learning per week. And then at the same time in Finland, is only a little bit more than half of that. Huge differences in the amount of time that students spend learning. But when you look at productivity in this system, you can see in Finland or Germany or Switzerland or Japan, students learn a lot in very little time. Whereas in the United Arab Emirates, they spend a lot of time and they learn rather little. In Spain also, you can see it's not so much a question of time. It's more a question of how do we use that precious good, the student learning time. Very important lesson. Of course, it's easy to say, very, very hard to change. One of the things that we can see is actually that the status quo has many protectors. Sometimes we as parents are part of the problem, not the solution. We get very anxious when our children no longer learn things that were very important for us. Or even more so when they do learn things that we no longer understand. Teachers are more likely to teach how they were taught themselves than how they were taught to teach. And as a minister of education, you can lose an election over education. But you never win an election over education because it takes so much time to translate good ideas into better outcomes. The plant of education is growing very slow, often overnight. So it's really hard to change things. But if you ask yourself, what do world-class systems do? The first thing is they move from just sorting people where only some people succeed to helping every student succeed because they understand that different students learn differently. And they embrace the diversity of students, the diversity of learning styles with very differentiated approaches to learning. Teachers being capable to see how different students learn differently, and school systems being open to foster this. They've also advanced from, just teaching students something to giving them a reliable compass and the navigation tools to find their own way through their world. Now, this is about, complex ways of thinking, complex ways of working. And of course, that commands a very different caliber of teachers. In the past, we tell teachers what to do, how to teach, where to teach, and so on, and then we expect things to go okay. Today, if you look to the most advanced education systems, teaching has become a high-level knowledge profession. Teachers spend some time in the classroom, of course, but they spend also time, as researchers, as designers, as facilitators. They're embedded in a very complex world. They are connected through digital technologies, become a very, very different profession. And of course, high-level knowledge workers don't like to work in a factory. No. Our schools are still designed as, factories. No. What you can see in the most advanced systems that, you talk less to your supervisor, to your school principal, to your government. You talk more to the next teacher, to the next school, to the next education systems. No. Information flows are no longer just vertical, but they're increasingly lateral. No. Those are some of the elements of world-class school systems, and let me talk about some of them in more detail. The first, if you look forward, in the OECD era, we now have more broadband connections than we have people. Everybody's got connected. And that's fueling the rise in artificial intelligence. And that pushes us to think much harder about what makes us human. The great industrial revolution has taught us how to educate second-class robots, people who are compliant with the norms of the industrial economy. In the age of artificial intelligence, we need to think harder what it makes about first-class humans. Now, how do we complement the artificial intelligence of computers with the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes, the values of humans? When you think about this, half of 15-year-olds in the PISA test say, I feel really bad if I'm not connected. Being part of the digital world has become like drinking water and breathing air for young people. And you can see, if you think about digitalisation, that's been incredibly democratizing. Students and teachers are at a level playing field. Students now have access to the same resources than their teachers. And the same happens in society. We can all collaborate, connect. But technology has also concentrated power at a rate that we have never seen before. Technology is incredibly particularizing. The smallest voice can be heard everywhere. You post something on Twitter and everybody can listen to you. But it's also incredibly homogenizing, squashing individuality, cultural uniqueness. Questions around identity become at the center of world-class education. That's the kind of technology is pushing everything together, and it's harder to find yourself. Technology has been incredibly empowering. You can see that right here in Madrid. Now, the most successful companies these days have the product before they have the money. They don't start with a big company, they start with a big idea. That's the power of technology today. It really enables us to change the world for better or for worse. But technology can also be incredibly disempowering when we become the slaves of computer algorithms these days that tell us whether to turn left and right or how we feel and so on. And if technology understands us better than we do understand ourselves, we are at the limits of our development. So actually, and where you end up on this chart has a lot to do with the education and the schooling. The kinds of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, have become easy to digitize, to automate. Those things are disappearing very, very fast. And I say this right here in Madrid. A lot of the schooling is still about memorization, helping people absorb knowledge. But that knowledge is a commodity available for everyone together, and it is sort of disappearing from our societies, our labor markets. Think about it this way. 10 years ago, everybody got those little devices in their hands. And soon the virtual world and the real world became to integrate it. And then everybody got connected. But while some things got easier, other things got much harder. When you think about, 20 years ago, to teach someone to read was straightforward. It was about a set of techniques to extract knowledge from texts. And when you didn't know the answer to a question, you can look it up in an encyclopedia and you can trust the answer to be true. Today, you look up information on Google or wherever and you find 100,000 answers to your question. Nobody tells you what is right and what is wrong, what is true, what is not true. Literacy is no longer about extracting knowledge. Literacy in the digital age is about constructing knowledge. A very different set of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values. Much harder to teach, much harder to learn. Putting learning at the center, experiential learning at the center. And I said, how wonderful it is that technology connects all of us. But the reality is, technology connects you with people who think like you, who look like you, who are like you. Technology actually makes it harder to experience different ways of thinking, different ways of walking. That's the role of world-class schooling, to help people understand the nuances of the world, Think across the boundaries of disciplines. Connect the dots where the next innovation is going to come from. Those are the challenges of world-class education. When you look at this, it's about knowledge, it's about skills, but it's also about attitudes and values. Artificial intelligence is very powerful, but all it is, it's a great amplifier. It's a great accelerator. It amplifies good ideas, good practice, and it amplifies bad ideas and bad practice. What it means, it makes the humans much more important. Artificial intelligence is ethically neutral, but it's always in the hands of people who are not neutral. So questions around attitudes and values suddenly get from the margins of 20th century education to the center in 21st century education. And let's think about knowledge also in a little bit more detail. When you think about knowledge, the first thing you think about disciplinary knowledge. But actually, when you look at world-class systems today, they put much greater emphasis on deep epistemic understanding. Not how much do you know in biology and chemistry, but can you think like a scientist? Can you design an experiment? Do you understand cause and effect? Can you distinguish questions that are scientifically investigable from questions that are not? Can you think like a philosopher? Can you think like an historian? History is not about names and places. It's about understanding how the narrative of a society has emerged, how it has developed, how it's advanced, sometimes how it unravels when the context changes. What does it mean for the time in which we live today? Thinking like an historian. That's the one thing that you can really see, that world-class systems shift the balance from teaching students something to giving them the tools and ways of thinking. Why is this important? Because, in a world of science, the facts, the way of the world, that will change very quickly. But if we do not master the foundations of a discipline, we will get lost in the world of Google. Very important shift. And knowledge, you can actually see that here. Memorization that was very practical, very useful in the past, helps us somewhat, but actually hurts us most. When you look at the PISA test, memorization helped people to get some easy tasks right. But as the problems became more complex, in this case, where you need to reason mathematically, understand fundamental mathematical concepts, actually memorization is hurting you. What matters is the capacity to connect what you do not know with what you know, to be able to elaborate, think out of the box, extrapolate from what you know, apply your knowledge in an unforeseen, novel situation. Those are the things that matter most. But knowledge is only the starting point. The dimension of skills is as important. And when you think about skills, the first thing you think about is cognitive skills. Creativity, critical thinking, and so on. And yes, they're very important. But at least as important these days are the social and emotional skills of people. Empathy, curiosity, courage, leadership. In a world of technology, those become increasingly important. That's what neuroscience is telling us. That's what employers are telling us. You get all the same message. But in our education system, we're still quite far away from that. We talk about social skills, of course. It's written into every curriculum. But when you look in schools, we sit students behind individual desks, and at the end of the year, we test whether, you are better than your neighbor. There's still the logic of our ways of schooling, the logic of sorting, not the logic of collaboration, of working together. Social emotional skills rising in importance. And then the question of attitudes and values. Now, once again, success in education today is no longer about just learning something, but about developing this kind of inner compass that shows us where to go and how to move. When we ask ourselves, what are the key competences that are at the center of modern education systems these days? I looked around the world in over 60 countries, and we actually came to very similar answers across cultures and contexts. The first is your capacity to imagine, to build something of intrinsic positive worth. That's the obvious distinction from technology. Technology extrapolates from what we know. But to really build genuine new insights is still a very human capacity. But equally important is our capacity to manage tensions and dilemmas. The world is no longer black and white. Navigating ambiguity has been a great fundamental competency. That's something that actually education systems have a hard time. We always want to know the right answer, and we think we have the right answer, but often success is about, finding your way in conflicting viewpoints and ideas. And then, of course, take responsibility. We know a lot of things. We can do a lot of things, but are we able to mobilize our cognitive, our social and emotional resources to actually take responsibility? Very important in the 21st century. What are the implications for world-class education systems? The first is to do with openness. Actually, we're very good in education to teach young people the established wisdom of our times. We transmit what we know to the next generation. We're not so good at actually helping young people question the established wisdom of our times. Being open for the novelty. We know how to learn. What's harder for us is to unlearn and relearn when the context changes. And sometimes that is as important. When the world is changing, sometimes we need new ways of thinking, and sometimes our old ways of thinking are preventing us from engaging with the novelty. Reflection, being able to step back, to see the bigger picture, to detect the forest among the trees. Very hard for us. We get lost in the information streams that come towards us every minute, every second. But seeing the bigger picture, those are fundamental competencies. And then taking action again, mobilizing. Learning has always been a passive experience. We absorb knowledge. Today, that concept of student agency is at the heart of learning. Being able to do something, being able to mobilize, being able to take responsibility, requiring a very, very different learning environment. If you think about learning in the 21st century, the first thing that you'll notice in world-class school systems is that they teach fewer things at greater depths. One of the most surprising things, in a way, Spain is a good example. We teach a lot of things at relatively shallow depths. A lot of things are getting taught because we think, students have only this time in school. We need to teach them everything that they need to know in life. And that logic no longer works. World-class systems teach fewer things at greater depths. They remain true to the disciplines, but they confront students with interdisciplinary settings. Project-based, thematic learning has become very, very important. They focus on things that you can apply in a different context. Learning is meaningful, authentic, something where students can see their own experiences. And then when you talk about social emotional skills or character or values, some things are caught, not taught. As a teacher, people look to you no longer just at what you say, but increasingly about who you are. And that brings me to the next dimension. It's moving from prescription to really the idea of a profession that owns its practice. Now, when you think about world-class school systems, you can see that the public has a great level of trust in teachers as professionals. Teachers have authority as professionals. They invest a lot in preparing those people, and not just in universities. A lot of learning actually happens in schools. If you are a teacher in Shanghai in China, you teach less than half of the hours of a Spanish teacher. But you actually work more than a Spanish teacher. You just spend your time differently. You work with your colleagues to design new instructional practice. You work with parents, you work with individual students. You know your subject, but you also know your students. Collective ownership of practice. Basically, teachers together own their practice, they work on their practice, they make decisions not in accordance of regulation or prescription, but with the ideas of their practice. Something that we are still quite far away from this. Now, when you think about profession, there's three things that we have measured at the OECD. The first has to do with the knowledge of teachers. And when you think about the knowledge of teachers, you think about what they know about their subject. And of course, that's very important. It's the first thing your students will understand, whether you really own your subject. But equally important is to understand how different students learn that subject. And what we often forget is the knowledge about your students. Do you understand, who they are, how they think, how they feel? Do you really know the people in front of you? And that's something in the industrial form of schooling that's often been forgotten. We have tailorized education. We employ a school psychologist or a social worker, and the role of teachers has been very much focused on the delivery of instruction. And when you look at this across countries, you can see a country like Poland that has done really well in strengthening all of those kinds of aspects. The aspect of knowledge, the aspect of professional autonomy, and the aspect of the collaborative culture. In Poland, you can see all of those well developed. In Portugal, still a long way to go on all of these dimensions. Italy is interesting. You can see, actually, teachers can do what they like. Professional autonomy is very strong, but at the same time, the knowledge base and the collaborative culture is still quite weak. My children go to a school in France. Teachers are actually quite well prepared. They have good foundation knowledge, but actually a limited degree of professional autonomy. The system is very heavy, very prescriptive, and a weak collaborative culture. And then last but not least, if you look to Spain also, a lot of way to go on all dimensions. And Spanish people are very social people, but when you look at teachers, how they collaborate, you can see a lot of the collaboration is very informal. Sharing knowledge, exchanging practice. But as you move to the deeper layers of collaboration, observing somebody else's classrooms, working with your fellow teachers on the design of new practices, joint lessons, they're very rare in the Spanish school system. And actually, that's true in many countries. Collaboration in the school, among teachers, among students, among schools, is very, very weak. And why this matters? Because we know from our research that the more teachers teach jointly, the more they observe other teachers' practice, the more they engage in joint activities, the more they take part in collaborative learning, the greater their sense of ownership of professional practice. Being embedded in a strong profession is really important, and that is one of the key drivers of being satisfied with your job. You think, being satisfied with your job has all to do with money, paying teachers well, getting great salaries. But it's not so easy. Spain is actually a good example. Actually, teaching is reasonably financially attractive. That's not the problem. But it's become intellectually less attractive. Teachers are the factory workers, delivering knowledge. They're less embedded in the profession. You can see really here the satisfaction with the work, with the profession, has a lot to do with collective ownership of practice. Even the status of the teaching profession, how do teachers perceived in society, is highly predicted by the degree of professionalization, professional knowledge, professional autonomy, and the collaborative culture. Those are the hallmarks of the 21st century education system. They can be amplified with technology. Technology can be a great source for teachers actually to engage with each other, to learn from and with each other, to establish powerful platforms of learning. In the past, learning was divided into subject areas or academic and vocational education, things like that. Now we have a very compartmentalized school system. The future will be much more integrated, learning across the boundaries of discipline, learning from and with each other, integrating the world of work and the world of learning. Learning is not a place. Learning is an activity that extends through everything that we do. And again, technology will be a powerful bridge between the individual and the learning. What role do schools have in this picture? If you are in the Netherlands or the Czech Republic, you can see the majority of schools actually schools decide on the majority of the decisions. No? They decide, what they do, how they teach, who they employ, how they employ people. No? A lot of the responsibility is on individual students. If you go to the end of the in Greece and Turkey, no, schools are part of a big machine, but they have a very, very limited discretion. No? And if you go to, most of the decisions are made at higher levels of government. No? And if you see, Spain is also an example where the discretion that schools have to shape their own ideas, their own practice, is very, very limited. No? Most of the practices are decided by the system, not by the people. And again, most high-performing education systems have actually changed that dynamic. They make the actors at the front line. They put students at the center, student agency, teacher agency, and the ability of schools to shape their future as very important ingredients. And last but not least, it's about moving from compliance, from standardization, from conformity in learning, and teaching everybody in the same way, having every school look in the same way, to focusing more on ingenuity. We ask teachers about, what do you think about the environment at school? Are you going to be recognized, rewarded for being more innovative? And actually, only about a quarter of teachers say yes to this question. 3/4 of teachers perceive their own school to be a rather innovation-hostile environment. That may not be the truth. Teachers may be able to do a lot of things that they are not aware of. No? But it's the perceived reality of a system that is heavy, that doesn't give me the room to be truly ingenious in my work, to be recognized and rewarded for innovation. If we cannot change that perception, it's going to be very, very hard to change anything. Very last point, moving from idiosyncratic practices, and if we create a new law every time a government changes, put new things on top of the system, to thinking much more about how the different pieces of an education systems really fit together, with the student at the center and the education system built around this. Our education systems are all designed around the interests and needs of adults. They think about what students should learn, how they want to work. Too little time is spent on the learner at the center and designing the system around the needs of different learners in different systems. When you think about this systemic transformation, how do you change a system, not just an individual school, has a lot to do with how we include those at the front line in the decision. Where we do not engage teachers and school leaders and educators in the design of change, they will never help us with the implementation of change. No? Just changing things top-down is very, very hard. No? Where we don't build, the profession into the equation, where we don't build deep professional capacity for change. No? Change management starts in the school, starts everywhere, at every layer of the system. Leadership is not just about, leadership at the system level. Leadership is about every level. No? The teacher, the school leader, and distributing this. No? And then last but not least, looking outwards. No? Not just looking forwards, but looking outwards to the next teacher, to the next school, to the next education systems. Those systems that are open to the world, open to new ways of thinking, open to transformation are the ones that are advancing, and those systems that are afraid of the differences, that are afraid of looking outwards, that are afraid of looking forward, they're getting stuck in the paradigms of our 20th century. Again, these are just a few drivers, but I think the important thing is that we can change those things. Around the world, we see many successful schools. Right here in Madrid, in Spain, there are many, many successful schools. But we have also learned that we can design better school systems that recognize how different students learn differently and how we can better support them. So to ensure that every student learns at excellent levels. Thank you very much. Gracias.